So hi, everyone. I'm Rob Young. I'm a business owner and a member of the Issaquah Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee. And I'm going to be representing the Issaquah Chamber of Commerce today as we interview Lisa Callan, who's running for position number in the 5th district, position 2. Right. Okay. And Lisa's agreed to answer some questions today so that we can get to know her better. And the chamber's come up with 8 questions of relevant to business owners, typically in today's times. And so, as the audience knows, she'll have 2 minutes to respond to each of them. And so, Lisa, let's get started, if I could.
Sounds
So,
great.
please take 2 brief minutes to share why you are running for this office and the top 2 things you want constituents to know about you and as a candidate that make you uniquely qualified for the position that you've already actually done. So that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thanks to the chamber for giving us this opportunity to talk
Yeah.
to the community and business at large. So, I began serving as a volunteer in public schools, when my son was very young, and have always had a deep involvement in community engagement because I think that's what it takes to really have thriving communities. And with my engineering background and my business background through software consulting and the work that I've done, I felt like there's just a lot of work that could be done working with our schools to help prepare our kids for a brighter future. And that's what led me to run for the school board. And then as I rocked and did my work as an elected school board member, really understanding and learning so much more about the connection with the policies and funding that happens at the state level, knew that there was just a lot more work we needed to do and could do with my background to bring to bear on making good policy decisions and funding decisions for our education system and so much more. Because when you're doing education work, you see how our K-12 system intersects with so many of our other issues, whether it's transportation, whether it's as a thriving community, which means we have a thriving business community and support. We're building the workforce for tomorrow, right, for our businesses, and even the
Right.
workforce of today. Or so many high school students, are employed by so many of our businesses, and really keeping our families together. So, that's the work that I continued as I've been representing the state, which has been a great honor for my last 2 terms, and wanting to continue to make sure that we're pushing for strong transportation systems and education systems, making sure our kids can really compete in a global economy, making sure we're working to through the pandemic, really improve our healthcare system and really fight to try to help our businesses, really work and battle through such seismic economic times that we've had and are bumping up to still against today. So in all these areas, I'm considered, very excited to continue to do that work and looking forward to really paying attention to how all of these issues intersect and driving policy that really creates a stronger, better community for all.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Thank you, Lisa, for that. Um, the electrical grid in our region, this is changing topics,
Mhm.
is aging and at risk of reaching maximum capacity. So cities like Issaquah and are without a redundant energy infrastructure. It's been that way for a while. So with the state's
Mhm.
climate plan and push towards all electrical renewable energy, what are your plans to support the changes in infrastructure and will you support Energy Each Side?
Yeah, I'm definitely a supporter of Energized Side and definitely want to work and bring our state legislature to the strong partnership to make sure that we've got the power grid that we need, really sufficient for our population increases and for the energy demands in the Puget Sound and of course across the state over the next several decades and as we grow out and make that robust. I think that with my engineering background and my systems thinking and the role that I've played on the capital budget, that really is the infrastructure and the building budget, we're really bringing to bear all of that work, right? And it's again the intersectionality of those issues, making sure that we've got the power that we need and the power grid that's strong and robust, but also making sure that we've got the workforce to support that, to figure out how we actually lift and elevate and bring forward the green technologies in order to do that work. And then making sure we've got the glide slope and the runway to meet the demands as the power grid goes, those demands go higher and higher, but also making sure that we're transitioning and bringing everybody along with us so that everybody continue to thrive. So if jobs transition from one sector to another, that we're providing that training and making sure that workforce is there and in place as we do that work. So it takes all of that, and very excited about what our future is, and certainly the investments coming from the federal government. But we have to make sure we're working with our local partners, both in the public and private sectors, to make sure it happens in a way
Yeah,
that's that we can really keep our communities thriving.
especially that federal money for infrastructure to make sure that
Right.
it goes the right place.
Exactly.
It's supposed to go to the right place, but that's what people,
Right.
somebody has to make sure it does. But
We have to
oh,
make sure it gets leveraged, right, in a way
sure.
that really is optimal for our state. And then we can take our state dollars and really leverage and take advantage of those federal dollars that are coming in. So that dollar goes further and
Right.
accomplishes more. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So the chamber's always been a catalyst and a champion for the business community. Washington's economic competitiveness and the vitality of community reliant on healthy businesses of all sizes, anybody's type of business. Do
Mhm.
you do you
Mhm.
consider yourself business friendly? And can you give examples of legislative issues that you would support that are beneficial to the business community?
Absolutely. I mean, I love our businesses. I mean, without a strong business and a continuing business like you described, right? All sizes, all types. And that's what really allows our local communities to thrive. Ultimately, that's what's the engine that's driving our state and our state economy, and
Mhm.
allowing us to thrive as a state. And um, they provide all the goods and services that um, and careers that my own family depends on, right? Also, our
Mhm.
communities, our schools, everybody is dependent on where we go with that. The
Right.
economy of the Puget Sound is the envy of the nation. I mean, there's just so much good happening here, and there's just so much more work that we have to do to keep it that way. Especially in these, like I've described before, these kind of seismic economic times that we have.
Mhm.
So, I've spent a bulk of my work ensuring that our schools are preparing the workforce for a competitive environment, and they're able to compete in the global economy and increase access to higher education, making sure that we're connecting that workforce opportunity and incentive in higher ed and post-secondary apprenticeships, and all of those programs are connected to our workforce, right? We made some very significant moves in the legislature around building out opportunity um, grants and tuition support for that was really supported by and funded partially by the Business Roundtable, and doing deep community engagement about what's the right sectors to build that out in. We need to make sure that we're growing our business sectors across our state so every part of our state can thrive, right? And I think that that's really
Right.
critical to making sure that we're doing what we're doing in terms of actually supporting businesses in the past. And one of the big things that have been coming up is really trying to make sure that we're engaging with the deep work that the tax structure work group has been doing, which is a state work group that's been happening at a high level. We want to make sure that I expect to see some changes, and we'll be pushing for B&O tax reform. We've heard that consistently, especially with
Mhm.
my partners in the Issaquah Chamber about what we need to do and how we need to show that up. So I'm hoping we'll
Right.
see some of that come forward this session. Certainly pushed very hard this last session to increase the floor for our smallest businesses on when they even have to pay B&O tax altogether, increasing the tax credits, and making sure that we're creating that space. And then we have to make sure that we're paying attention to, as we bump up into a recession, how else we can come to bear as we have this, trifecta of all between the pandemic and the recovery, and the the pressure that we have on our businesses that show up differently for the type of business sector that you're in, that we're
Right.
doing very nuanced work in that space to make sure that we can lift up all of our businesses.
Okay. So nationwide, we're seeing an increase in crime. We all know that.
Mhm.
And when it comes to public safety, what initiatives would you support to keep citizens safe and reduce criminal activity?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is a big conversation that I'm having deeply, and have been having, in particular over the last couple of years. And we are seeing an increase in crime. In particular, we're seeing an increase in retail and auto thefts. We're also, unfortunately, seeing an increase in homicides, um, mostly in domestic violence
Mhm.
spaces, and even in some gang violence spaces across the state. Those aren't necessarily local to our community, but we are seeing those. And nationally, that same thing is happening. We're seeing those trends across the nation. And so what I've been doing is trying to get into deeper conversations directly with our business owners, having direct conversations with our community members about what it is that is, what kind of tools can we bring to bear? So from a business perspective, what would be helpful in having state support or technical assistance on to help build your toolbox to deter crime? Can we do more in environmental design protections? Can we do more in offering grants? Can we do more on providing maybe landlord mitigation around the impacts of being a victim of crime? What else can we do around that? So trying to have deep conversations there, and of course having deep conversations with our state, county, and local partners and law enforcement about what we need to do and continue to do in that space. In the last session, there was a lot of work that we did, and I supported bringing forward for our law enforcement, in particular, trying to increase body camera grant programs. Our law enforcement and our Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, are really working to stand up a grant body camera grant program. We increased training, and we're going to try to push again to increase statewide law enforcement training and create a pool of officers so that they're more available and ready on demand for our police forces, and distribute that across the state, which I think is great. We also wanted to push hard to bring in more dollars for law enforcement wellness programs. The kind of trauma that they face every day on their jobs, making sure that we're doing what we can do to help stabilize and sustain our current workforce. Then spent a lot of time working on trying to figure out how else we can support other aspects that show up on a law enforcement's door around substance use, and providing some specific training to help law enforcement understand how to interact with persons with substance use disorders and behavioral health. And of course, I spend a good chunk of my time working specifically on behavioral health intersections with public safety and our education systems and our healthcare systems. And so worked hard to try to bring some funding into our communities in the 5th Legislative District to try to elevate what we need to do within our law enforcement space. So specifically, like Issaquah already has some behavioral health and human services networking connections with their police departments in their community. Maple Valley was one of the first areas to kind of pull that forward. And then I was able to get some funding brought forward for Snoqualmie Valley and Snoqualmie Police to do the same thing. So as we watch what those best practices are and turn out to be, I want to make sure that we're building out the toolboxes for that across the region.
So do you think, before I go on to the next one, do you think ongoing education would help in?
Yeah, I think ongoing
time?
education, not only for law enforcement, right? And what does that look like and mean, but also training in ways that we can help out our law enforcement partners, because workforce is such a strained element right now. How do we offload the burden, administrative burden of some of the work that they're doing that doesn't require that, that actual, the badge and the gun requirement to be there to bring safety to the picture. So what is that work and we can do? But I think there's a lot of, trying to make training more effective and efficient too for officers, so that they're not pulled off of the, off of their, off the streets to go do extensive training. So can we provide, and actually we did this last biennium, provided some funding to build out online training, resources and and then also community training, right? And how we can bring together communities and how we can partner with that, because that helps build the relationship trust between our law enforcement and our residents and our neighbors. And, so they feel safe calling police, but they also know what to do and how to do and what was most effective in terms of actually deterring or responding to crime. So I think, there's just so much more we can do and need to do, but getting very nuanced in that tool set means having a lot of deep conversations with all of this, everybody that's impacted by this. And so that's what I have been doing and really working hard right now as we lead into this next session to try to make sure I'm getting into those very specific conversations.
Gotcha. Okay. You touched on this a little bit before, but I got to ask it again. We all know that the B&O tax is necessary in our state and city economies, and we also know that businesses that support a large majority of local nonprofit organizations. We're experiencing losses in the stock market. It's still down. Increased inflation, that's still going.
Yeah.
continuing supply chain issues that are getting better, but it's going to take a while, and employee shortages still, and inflation's really real. How do you intend to support businesses during this economic downturn?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're great questions, and I think it's worth asking the question twice. I mean, this is what we have to pay attention to if we really want to keep not only a recovery happening from the pandemic, but making sure that we're staying in a robust strength position in Washington State and in our local communities.
Right.
Without strong businesses, we just it all starts to crumble. We have to have that dependency on our businesses to make that happen. So, it is clear that in particular in these economic times, our very small businesses are really, at high risk on what that looks like and don't have the national chain buffer, and all of that to try to help mitigate and figure out how to move in dynamics. So I think we have to really pay close attention to that. I think as we're looking at the issues that you brought, the supply chain, right? What can we continue to do to build out and help and support the supply chain? We provided capital dollars to help with investments in our ports on specific projects that were targeted towards increasing the supply chain bottlenecks that we're seeing. The transportation, certainly the work that we're doing on I-90 and Highway 18, we're there for safety and trying to get people moving from point A to point B and helps get our workforce to work that live in other parts of our community but work here in Issaquah and Issaquah Valley and that range. But also it's a major supply chain transportation route from the ports and across our state and bringing goods and services from across and from other states and across our country. So we have to continue to really push on that infrastructure and transportation structure. We have to do work to continue to do kind of what I would say is a crisis response to workforce. I think that's just key and critical. So when we have such a workforce shortage across the board, and that's impacting businesses' ability to even, offer their business hours and their strength or deliver, we have to figure out some pathways there. So I'm very open to and want to hear directly from everybody about how we can lift that up in this next legislative session around workforce. And then, of course, making sure that we've got an education system that's really connected to the apprenticeship programs and demands of what we need to do there. And then I'll just, circle back again on the tax structure work group and the recommendations coming from that. They've had a multi-year effort, done an extensive outreach, bipartisan across the state, trying to reach every nook and cranny of every person impacted, by the tax structure. And we know income tax is off the table. We know that's not a conversation that they're having. But certainly, how do we actually really make an effective change on the B&O tax that's going to be meaningful? And then, of course, how do we reduce the red tape and the extensive, overhead around permitting, licensing, the L&I, all of those extensive things that continue to burden our businesses. So taking a deep dive in that space is also really important.
Okay, that makes sense. Another big topic is housing. Um, Housing and affordability is an issue, and the supply and demand issues that cannot be solved by government alone. Knowing that the East Side has had some of the highest land costs in the country and in the state, what are your plans to address housing? And that's a big thing, I know.
It
So,
is. It is. And it intersects everything, right? I mean, whether it's helping to address our housing, our homeless concerns and those that are facing housing instability, whether that's trying to find affordable housing for workforce, depending on whether or not you're in the service sector and you're talking about, service staff and wait staff, or you're, I mean, everywhere from what you can afford versus the salary that you're making, and to our first responders and our teachers, right? And all of that. So if we don't have that affordable housing mix, across our regions, then that again affects our ability to thrive as a community and as a region. So it's really, there's three areas, right? There's supply. We need to do what we can do to try to beef up supply. So look at how we can shorten and reduce permitting times and how we can do that work, and then understand how we can create that supply and incentivize building that affordable housing stock. And then the other area is sustaining existing housing that's affordable we're seeing some loss of that, right? As we either turn over sale of property, um, to turn it into a higher, you know, higher priced housing that isn't that meeting in that continuum of affordable housing, but working with our county and our city and our local partners to try to figure out how we can incentivize building out that full continuum of affordable housing. So that definition of affordable, right, is depending on who you're talking to, is either about housing to take care of those that are experiencing housing instability, all the way up to um, the middle class housing and that middle income housing, and what does that look like and mean. So, and then as we try to work and figure out how we can stabilize our existing stock, we can, there's also the subsidies, right? The state can bring forward, so our housing trust fund dollars, and looking at how we partnership with that and our cities and our local governments like King County to really leverage bringing in this braided funding to do the work that we need to do to try to build that stock up, and build the access to that across our communities. So one of the things that I worked on this last session, actually we started it with the last biennium budget, was building out a new bucket in the capital budget that was specifically for grant dollars for cities to be able to apply to bring infrastructure, pay for their infrastructure costs to connect to affordable housing. So then the city doesn't have to take on that burden. There doesn't have to be an increase in trying to figure out that funding to bring that affordable housing, and that added cost isn't there, for impact fees to the developer, that type of work. So I think there's a lot more there that we can do on leveraging those three aspects, and then creating a bigger gain for everybody's buck and investment to build out that continuum.
All right. Another big one is the lack of efficient and reliable transportation. Um, it hinders many areas of the East Side, we know, in making housing and hiring even more difficult and challenging for the business community also. Share with your position on sound transit coming to Issaquah and the King County transportation system that lacks north-south routes between Renton, Maple Valley to Issaquah.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear the minute you're stuck in traffic on the east side that our transportation infrastructure is inadequate. And it's inadequate not just, getting our kids to soccer. It's inadequate moving all of our people to, and our goods and our services getting to work. Access to workforce, again, which is just one of the top issues that we're facing right now in every community across the state. Access, for customers to reach your businesses, and
Mhm.
all of that requires robust and quick and safe transportation infrastructure and those options and choices. So I think we need to do everything we possibly can to speed up the light rail construction throughout the region, and get that to Issaquah. It was kind of the last in on the sound transit package, and see if we can't elevate that. And then really, we have to figure out how we hub and spoke that and build it, increase that north-south between Renton and Maple Valley. A significant portion of our workforce comes from, because of the backups on Issaquah Hobart Road, right, and Front Street and on 18, significant portions of our workforce come from Renton and Maple Valley and Issaquah, and I would argue the Snoqualmie Valley, right? I mean, there's the I-90 corridor for that, but that off cycle, outside of having your own transportation, the transportation that we have with Metro and any of Sound Transit going out into the valley to bring workforce back and forth from that region as well is very stifled and stymied. So the better we can grow the north, south, and all of these connections, the better off we are. And so anything I can do from the state that helps facilitate that, I'm all in on doing.
Just a suggestion, whoever needs to be motivated and understand how it works in our area to have mass transportation and light rail and stuff like that. I've been around a lot of different cities in the country, and it's looked at as a regional thing. So that
Mhm.
means it's kind of like having the Seahawks without a football stadium. So if
Right.
you're going to have a city and all these people
Yeah.
and Microsoft and Amazon and Costco and everything, do you want to just stop the games from happening, or do you want to make it so that some people will take uh, a transportation method that works for them, and it doesn't have to be 70% of the people take one way. It's having all these different pieces. Um, Anyway, okay, well, we'll move on. Thank you, though.
Yep, yep, yep.
Um, so we'd like to leave the last question open-ended. Whatever you'd like to share to the Issaquah community. We have a few minutes left on my recording, and then we'll relog in. But and maybe we didn't ask it in the interview, so it's open to comment.
Sure. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I think I mentioned this earlier in the previous questions, but these issues are all interwoven. We can't ensure a strong business climate without good schools. We can't have and expect a thriving business without stronger transportation infrastructure. We have to figure out ways to streamline and simplify bureaucracy at every turn to make it easier for businesses to exist and thrive on the east side. We have to have a continuum of services so that our families and the workforce are connected to getting what they need when and where they need it. That makes it easier for us to function as a family unit and function within the community and be ready and able to spend our dollars with our businesses. We have to continue to balance that quality of life with other competing needs that are going on to attract qualified employees. So as we work to figure out these intersections, whether it's behavioral health, whether it's our education systems, whether it's our small businesses and moving all the way up the chain, right, to our large businesses that are on a national level, to the quality of life in your neighborhood. What does that look like and mean in how we're addressing climate change, how we're dealing with housing? All of this is going to affect our ability to attract people to the Puget Sound to work, to keep our businesses and our communities thriving. Community safety, we talked about that. Of course, that is right in the middle of all of these major issues. If you don't feel safe in your neighborhood, you're not going to want to work there, you're not going to want to play there, and you're not going to want to live there. So these are all fundamental, necessary threads that we have to make sure are weaved together to grow that strength. And my background is systems engineering and systems thinking, and I work well in that space. And that's why I think I'm such a round hole and a round peg in the policy world. And what we're doing is because you try to figure out how you're really pulling together all of these pieces and you're making sure that you're coming up with solutions that work best for everybody. We try to get us most of the win-win-win. So I'm very excited to continue to partner with the chamber, with our businesses, with all our community members on all of these issues to really ensure that our region still is the best place in the world to live. And I love the work that I do, and I love our neighbors and our businesses and our residents, and we can work together to make sure that we can thrive and all support each other and lift the whole structure up. And so that's what I got to say. And thanks really much. I appreciate again the opportunity.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Lisa. Now, today's interview with Lisa has been recorded and will be added to the Chamber YouTube channel for public viewing. I'd like to thank Lisa for taking the time today to address the business community and answer some of our questions.